The interesting thing about some of the modern issues we have with the carrier air group and the strike range is that people keep bringing up its range. People keep bringing up the capability of the aircraft in the air group. And they forget that in the name of saving really not a lot of money overall, a lot of people made a lot of very interesting decisions about what aircraft they'd select. And whilst I've done a video about the F-14 Tomcat, and I've spoken about that, well, I'm now doing a video about the other portion of the air wing which made the Tomcat work. The other portion of it. That is the A6 Intruder. You see, if the Tomcat is the shield of the air wing, the shield of the carrier battle group, the thing that will stop the attacks, the thing that will blunt the enemy's blade when it's coming for you, the Intruder is what will devastate the enemy's blade before it even launches. The Intruder is designed to take a lot of bombs and a lot of other weapons, an awful long range from its carrier, and drop them as precisely as physically can be done in a way which is going to cause maximum destruction. This is an aircraft which is designed around the philosophy of two things. One, all-weather attack aircraft for long-range interdiction missions, and to have a short takeoff and landing capability so it can be used for marine close air support working out of rough strips. Oh boy. In simple terms, the A6 Intruder, if it was still under production and in use, could actually have been used from the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carriers, probably. It has a short enough takeoff range of a little bit of work. It could have done the rolling takeoff. The landing would have probably still required something in the range, something to arrest it, to be fitted. But this shows the capability of some of the aircraft from not very long ago. And to an extent, we've actually regressed the capability. We've regressed the abilities these air groups had. In the name of commonality and in the name of efficiency. And there are some good benefits from that. Trust me, there is. One of the reasons why you have as large a number of air groups as the US Navy currently has. One of the reasons why you have the air groups training and capabilities they currently have in terms of their actual pilot abilities is because they have focused in very much on certain types of aircraft and have reduced and shrunk down the air group. But that comes at a cost. And if we pretend it doesn't come at a cost, then we are basically being willfully stupid. And the question is always, is the cost worth it? Because this is what you have when you have a specialist strike aircraft, an all-weather attack aircraft. And here's the really fun thing. It starts design work in 1957. It enters service in 1962. It serves till 1992. It was supposed to be replaced by, well, potentially the A-12 Avenger II, which was the McDonnell Douglas General Dynamics take on a flying wing bomb truck. But that was only ever put into mock-up. They never actually built any. And the program was sort of cancelled in 1991, but there was enough litigation about it, it was only actually cancelled through settlement in January 2014. So in other words, it took them 23 years to cancel the program? 23 years to cancel the program. And the thing is, this aircraft itself was in service till 1997 with the US Navy, US Marine Corps until 1993, and it was in production. I know I'm not sure if I said service or production, but in production till 1992. So some of the aircraft which were 5 years old were some of the ones which were retired in 1997. And there are variants of it. There's also the EA-6B Prowler, which is what the the Growler, aka the Super Growler, the Hornet electronic warfare aircraft, has replaced. And that was manufactured from 1966 to 1991. and was in service till 2019 with the US Marine Corps, 2015 with USN, because it was such a useful aircraft. And the thing is, an airframe like this, you can do a lot with it. You can modify it quite heavily. It's a very basic, very simple airframe, but it works. 878 nautical miles at maximum payload. 878 nautical miles at maximum payload. And when you consider the weapons and the fits that they could carry, you know, the missile systems, it's a nice collection. And there were honest discussions at various points about trying to fit a version of Tomahawk onto them. I don't think they ever actually got round to it, but there is a theoretical possibility, if you look at the weights and at some of its hard points were designed to take, that it could have been modified or could have possibly taken it itself. They could, at maximum load, be carrying 14,000 pounds of bombs. That's usually 28 500-pound bombs. They could carry nuclear weapons. They could carry Mark 60 Captor mines. They could carry Shrike, standard arm anti-radiation missiles, Walleye, Maverick, Harpoon, and Slammers, Harm, Skipper, Sidewinder, and Tiled decoy missiles. They could carry rocket pods, the Zuni, the FFR AR pods, and various others. They could carry up to 5 300-gallon, that's 1,100 litres, drop tanks. And they're US gallons, not Imperial gallons. Be only 250 Imperial gallons, but you know. I do love the fact that the US version of Imperial and the British version of Imperial is different, but we'll leave that to one side. You know, the sheer range and capabilities of these aircraft was immense for their period. They were the Swiss Army knife of the air wing in terms of strike capability. Oh, we have that target. Okay, we can carry this bomb load. That'll go be gone. That is quite literally what they are for. They are how you reach out and touch things if you're the carrier commander. And with all that extra fuel added on, that adds a lot to them. That extra fuel could add a lot to their range. If we consider their internal fuel capacity is 2,385 US gallons, that's roughly 9,000 litres. You can add 5,500 extra litres on there, so you could take it up from 9,000 to 14,500 litres of capacity. Or alternatively, 3,885 US gallons of capacity. That's a lot of fuel at maximum. You're not carrying any extra external bombs at that point, but at that point, your ferry range is long. It's long indeed. They weren't fast. Well, how do I put this? They weren't Mach aircraft, but they weren't designed to be. Their maximum speed was 560 knots. That's 640 miles per hour. And that's at sea level. They had a cruising speed of 412 knots. And they had a stalling speed of 98 knots, which meant they could slow really, really far down with their flaps down. They never exceeded a speed of 700 knots. Now, the never exceed speed is an interesting one in an aircraft, because if an aircraft has a never exceed speed, this is basically the point at which, if they exceed it, they're going to have damage of some kind done to their engines or their airframe. Considering the range of capability this aircraft brings, no one's going to be too worried. But its design story is an interesting one. So when we start looking at this aircraft's history in terms of its design, it all goes back to the Korean War and the joys of the A-1 Skyraider in that war. And in fact, the US Navy publishes in 1956 an operational requirements document. It then released a request for proposals in February 1957. So basically what one does is it's sort of a heads up, we're going to be asking for this, so you guys might want to start investing, start doing this. And then a year later, they put the request for proposals out. They're looking for a close air support attack bomber at that point, capable of hitting the enemy at any time. In response to this, there were submissions from Bell, from Boeing, from Douglas, from Grumman, from Lockheed, from Martin, from North American, and Vought. And yes, that is both from Lockheed and Martin. They were separate companies at that time. All these submissions get a type designation. Grum's was G16128. And after they'd all been evaluated, the USN announced that Grum had been selected. And this is one of those periods where there were enough contracts going on that, when one was selected and one wasn't selected, you didn't start suing them because that might muck up your possibility of being selected for another job. This is one of the problems, again, when you start cutting down the pool in terms of aircraft and start cutting down the number of types of different aircraft you can actually have, and you start making each aircraft life or death for the companies involved, or at least for the divisions which provide those aircraft. And that means that it suddenly becomes worthwhile sinking tens of millions or hundreds of millions of pounds or dollars into a lawsuit to try and win it. And searching for grounds you can. Whereas in a period like this, where there's lots of competition, we lost. We'll try for the next one. Plus, to be honest, Grumman's design team were led by Robert Nafis and Lawrence Meade Jr. Meade was the guy who would later be involved in the Lunar Excursion Module and the Grumman F-14 Tomcat. So there is some interesting links going on here, and of course the F-14 I've already discussed. That's a pretty good design team, and there's a lot of interesting people involved there. The fact that there's a link between these two aircraft, even more so than their operational ability and operating alongside each other, is just an extra chef's kiss to the scenario. They worked on the design and carried on working, and in September 1959 it was approved by the Mock-Up Review Board. And then in the early 1960s, they decided that they wanted to include some advanced avionics. And they wanted to include some advanced computerized avionics and systems. And this is one of the reasons why that team is then later on involved in the Lunar Excursion Module, the people sometimes tell me off because I would call it the 111, but it is the 111. But the trouble is, the person who I grew up with who flew it called it the 111, and I'm not sure why, but it means it's in my brain for the aardvark. But it's the 111. I do realise it's the 111, but if I'm not thinking about it, I will just say what I first heard it introduced as, which was the 111. To build, and this is why they're using these people to build these things later on, because they have the experience from this program. And then they start testing. And testing doesn't go on for a long time. As we said, it's manufactured from 1962 onwards and introduced into service in 1963, and it first flies in 1960. So the testing lasts pretty much about a couple of years in terms of pre-manufacture testing. And this is an aircraft again, which was first put out for operational requirements in 56 and request for proposal in 57, and selected in 58. So it's literally going into production 4 years after it's been selected, and service 5 years after it's been selected. It's a very quick development period. And again, that's one of the reasons you can do that is because of the pace of aircraft development at the time, because of the number of different aircraft being worked on, because of the breadth of industry. You have a lot more capacity really to deal with the problems. Yes, aircraft have got more advanced and they require more complex solutions today because we expect more of them. That is a solid case for why it takes longer to get aircraft into service. But it's also the fact that the breadth of industry isn't there. So you don't have the same breadth of development and breadth of problem solving going on. You have a very few companies, and they might not be doing multiple, and there might be only one or two companies sort of actually entering ideas for a project. So you might only have one or two sets of solutions for a problem, whereas when this is first designed, you've got 8 potential solutions for problems, 8 different teams who've been thinking about a problem from their own perspective, and that gives you a tremendous breadth of thought about things, and that's useful because it helps you problem solve and helps you build up the wider force structure. The testing was pretty good. It went fairly well, and the only big difference that happens between the first 6 production aircraft and subsequent aircraft were jet nozzles. Basically, the jet deflection using tilting tailpipes had been proposed, but the performance benefits were not worthwhile from all the complication added. So they were fixed at a 7-degree downward angle, and that saves weight and complexity in the aircraft. And, well, once they enter service, the US Navy keeps on developing them. Once they enter service, US Navy really likes them. These are some really useful aircraft. They found them to be, at initial points, requiring high levels of maintenance compared to their previous aircraft. But very quickly they found that was quite solvable. One of the things was that they started realizing, well, hang on, we've got this wonderful system in here called BASE, which I'm going to try to make sure I get the correct phrasing for, because sometimes I don't, because it's spelt, well, it's pronounced BASE, BASE, but it's basic automated checkout equipment. And they had 2 versions of those, a version which was for standard aircraft maintenance, and a version which was for when you were doing heavy maintenance. And these sort of systems, they allowed them to do a lot of preventative maintenance. And this is what I was found is this was the first aircraft type which was really built around preventative maintenance as a model, which is one of the reasons why it was considered to be so maintenance heavy at the beginning, because the teams were adjusting to how they dealt with maintenance on this aircraft. Once they did get into it, though, it proved to be a very reliable, very high availability aircraft type, and very easy to keep going. As said, though, sadly, it didn't have a proper successor. It didn't get a successor. But its design and its stability at subsonic speeds, and the fact it was able to take such heavy weapons and so many weapons, meant it could get more and more further away from its targets. So, in the nicest way, it was using the thing of, well, I'm just a bomb truck. As you know, an aircraft, I'm a bomb truck. And I carry these weapons, so I don't necessarily need to be stealthy. My weapons do. I can stand off back here, take you out from quite a long way away, and then after you are suppressed and after you're no longer a problem, then I can come in. And then there was the addition of, well, here's my sibling, the Prowler. And that will knock back your air defenses a few centuries. We'll say we'll knock back your air defense level to about 1700. How's that feel like? Yeah, probably about that, yeah. And then I will come in and drop bombs on you. It was, for its time, probably one of the most capable and versatile assets the US Navy had. And I know I keep emphasizing this, but I'm going to get into this again. It is all about the punch it packs. Now, this array of ordnance is really quite cool, and it's basically the possible ordnance you can put on the aircraft. So, I would say it's sort of each level in is one of the sort of the loads you could carry. But it's not quite that. There is some stuff in there just literally for image reasons. But it's worthwhile thinking about. Because you've got in the outside ring, you have got 5 mock-ups of multiple ejector racks in front. To the right and left of those are 46 Mark 81, 113 kilogram, that's 250 pound bombs. And the circle is closed off by 30 of the Mark 82 227 kilogram, that's 500 pound bombs. And remember, as I've said, they can carry 28 of those. Officially. 28. not 30. But you know, there is some artistic license going on with this imagery. The second ring in front of the plane are 5 what I consider classified shapes. Napalm canisters and or nuclear weapons. There's a whole debate about that. And to the right of those are 13 Lao 10 rocket launchers with 4 127mm, that's 5-inch Zuni rockets each. And on the opposite side of that, i.e. to the left, there are 13 Aero 7D Lao 3A rocket launchers. 19 7cm, that's 2.75-inch rockets are displayed there. And to the right and left of these are horizontal stabilizers and the 15 Mark 8 83, that's 454 kilogram or 1,000-pound bombs, and 12 Mark 79 fire bombs. They are displayed behind the aircraft. And then we have the inner ring. The inner ring, well, behind the left wing are 3 Aero 8A practice bomb containers. Behind the right wing are 5 Mark 84, 907 kilogram, that's 2,000-pound bombs. In front of the left wing are 5 AGM-12A bullpup air-to-ground missiles. In front of the right wing are 4 AIM-9B Sidewinder air-to-air missiles. And a Douglas D704 buddy-buddy refueling tank with extendable snorkel. And the aircraft itself is carrying, of course, 4, well, how to put this, 300-gallon tanks. It is a really nice display of just what these aircraft are for. They're bomb trucks. The F-14s, and before them the F-4 Phantoms and various other things, will clear out the sky of fighters. They will clear out the enemy air threat. D-6A Prowlers, well, they'll make sure that anything that gets in the way, or rather the EA-6Bs, aren't they, Prowlers? They'll make sure that anything that gets in the way will not be in the way for long in terms of air defences, and then this will turn up and will make whatever facilities you wanted to have there cease to exist. Now, these days, of course, we'd probably use, I don't know, F-35s for doing a strike, and they could probably go in and do some precision work. But there's still a limited amount of ordnance they can carry, especially internally. So let's say we want to do a heavy bomb run. So we might use, if you're a US carrier wing, you might use your Growlers, your Super Growlers, your F-18Gs to push back the enemy radiation, the enemy sort of air defences and facilities, and to push them back, and then come in with the Super Hornets, which, if loaded to bear, can carry a hefty amount of ordnance. They really can. I'd say it's kind of interesting to me because they're probably going to have to carry a mixture of ordnance, and theoretically they can carry more bombs if they're loaded as purely bomb trucks because they have more hard points. But you know, they have 11 hard points to the Intruders. I think it's 5. Yeah, 5 hard points. Interesting enough, across the 5 hard points for the Intruder, they could carry 18,000 pounds of munitions. Across the 11 hard points on the Super Hornet, they can carry 17,750 pounds. And they have bring back payloads, which do mean that they have to drop most of that before they get back. It's a thing of, it's not much of a loss. It's 250 pounds worth of loss, realistically. But it's a case of, that's across 11 hard points. And what can you really put on your wingtips? What can you really put on some of your outer wing hard points versus your under fuselage ones, etc.? All these things add up. It's interesting to think what a Super Intruder would have been like. It really is. But we'll never know. That being said, Shameless Book Plug. So it's Shameless Book Plug time, and yeah, this video is not going to be 25 minutes long, is it? Key aircraft, key ships, key leaders videos are supposed to be 25 minutes long. I don't think I've ever managed to get a key aircraft down to 25 minutes. Oh, but no, thank you for supporting the channel. Thank you for liking, sharing, subscribing, for helping the channel grow. Thank you for all you do, and you really do make this possible. You are the people who suggest the topics in terms of patrons, the people who suggest topics in terms of some of the gaps we have in November, etc. Coming up. The people who make it possible for me to dedicate 3 days a week, 4 days a week if you include the Saturdays, and probably should include Sundays, which are basically all day lives, but roughly 5 days a week of my time I'm able to dedicate my working hours to naval history because of your support, because of your kindness. That means so much. That really does. So thank you. Thank you for making that possible. And there are more books coming. And please do like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you want to see it, to help it grow. It really does help it grow and allows me to keep producing more and more videos. And more, and hopefully do better and better videos. And I've, literally when I'm recording this, I've just had this arrive. So I expect there to be some Italian Navy videos shortly. A reference guide to the Regia Marina, 1930 to 1945. And it looks gorgeous. It really does look gorgeous. It's beautiful. A beautiful book. Definitely going to make it into my Christmas recommendations. Certainly going to make it into my Christmas recommendations. Might do a whole series of Christmas recommendations. Get them done before I get anywhere near Christmas. Anyway, next we go on to the Cold War service. Now, of course, this aircraft by its definition enters service in the Cold War. It enters service straight into Vietnam. And the thing is, Vietnam, they are incredibly useful because these are all-weather strike aircraft. These are useful aircraft, and they can carry a useful amount of weaponry. Unfortunately, the typical mission profile was to fly low to deliver payload, which kind of makes it very, very vulnerable to anti-aircraft fire. And the problem is, you can fly low to deliver a payload. You can try and be a buccaneer in this world, and in many ways, the Intruder is kind of like the American buccaneer. But you realistically need to fly even lower. You need to fly even lower. And whilst there were many pilots who were very skilled at flying it as low as it could, honestly, the pilots who were flying it in the Vietnam War varied. Some were excellent, and some were probably too green for the situation they found themselves in, as there really weren't enough veterans around, and there really weren't enough pilots. It's kind of like the Korean War all over again, where the US Navy is sitting there going, but we achieved this level during World War II, and we achieved this level at the end of the Korean War. And you're sitting there going, yeah. And whilst you set up a special school for dogfighting training, and for focusing on that, and train that, what did you set up for bombing attack training? What did you do to set up for that mission and that experience? Go look. Go look at the US Navy. It's kind of an interesting scenario because you'd presume, because Top Gun is Strike Fighter Tactics Instructor Program, that would have a section about it in, and it does to an extent, but really it's still there about air-to-air combat. It's still about maintaining that quality, that training. And in terms of the bombing systems, it's usually still individual programs for individual weapon systems to make sure they're proficient, often conducted at the squadron level. It's not really the same. It doesn't have the same prestige, but still, they do a very good job. They are incredibly useful. Incredibly useful. And unfortunately, a lot of them do get lost because they are flying low. They're flying well within the envelope of the surface-to-air missiles, and there's a lot of development still being done on things that are going to lead to the prowlers, etc. But Yeah, they are useful. They're on call. They're something which, frankly, the US Navy is very happy to have in Vietnam, and as time goes on, they develop more and more of them. They are using more and more of them. They are developing the aircraft as well. And, you know, pretty much every aircraft carrier, from the moment they enter service to the end of the Vietnam War that goes into service in Vietnam, is supporting Operations Vietnam, is carrying these. Either US Marine ones or US Navy ones. And they're also US Marine Corps A6 Intruders based in Chulai, Da Nang, and Nam Phong in Thailand. They were incredibly useful. And they carried on being useful throughout the Cold War. They were always the long-range reach of the carrier group. When you turn up at Lebanon, they're useful. When you turn up at operations in the Gulf War, they are useful. When you turn up to do anything, Operation Restore Hope in Somalia, all these things, every time the US Navy, US Marine Corps is turning up for operations, there are intruders coming along. There are intruders coming on, and they are useful. And they are so useful for the deterrent operations, for the presence operations, for the missions when you are going to show the strength and capability of your carrier air group. But the trouble is, they aren't sexy. They are useful. They are the bomb trucks of the fleet. They are what give it so much of its capability, but they're not sexy. They're not a fighter. They're an attack aircraft. And so, even as they develop, even as they evolve, even as the various variants come into service, the B, the C, the D, the E, and all the others, as they develop up, and eventually there's the F and the G, as well as the various electronic warfare variants, which of course the EA-6Bs and variants of those, they are proving their usefulness and their adaptability. Adaptability. The A6F that was planned in the mid-1980s would have used the new turbofans used on the Hornet to provide improvements in fuel power, in power and fuel economy. It would have had new avionics. It would have had new systems which would allow it to even fire AIM-120 AMRAAMs, as well as get 2 additional weapon stations, 2 additional wing pylons. The US Navy chose, of course, to go down the A-12 Avenger route rather than authorizing the A-6F. But here's a really interesting scenario for you to think about. If they were using the same engines and had been upgraded to use the same engines and the same design, same systems as the Hornet, does the US Navy perhaps keep the Prowler and the Intruder going and the Hornet because they're all using the same engines, and logistically that's going to reduce a lot of the costs between the different types? That's one of those really interesting scenarios where you see the Super Hornet being more focused on being the fighter air defense of the force, and the Prowlers and the Intruders still retaining the role of bomb trucks. And it really has an interesting thing of what happens going on. Instead of an entirely F-based fleet, a fighter-based fleet, you might be looking at a mixed fleet of attack aircraft and fighters. And this is really where the 1990s comes in. The 1990s. It's where you see the US Navy almost reaching its peak in terms of capability of its carrier air group, and yet at the same time contemplating that with the end of the Cold War, the world has changed. What they're going to be allowed to do, what they're going to be allowed to have, is going to be different. They're not going to be allowed to be the capability they had been. Now, how can I say this about the carrier air wing being its strongest in the 1990s? Because in this period it had the assets which could really reach out and touch you a long way away. In terms of air defense, it still had access to Tomcats, which would carry heavy missiles and heavy, and a very, very large radar system. And whilst, yes, over time, please do not get me wrong, the Hornet has improved, systems have been added to it, it has got better and more capable, and this has helped, and there have been other things going on. But realistically, the breadth of capability that you had in the 1990s in terms of these very mature designs which were capable and versatile and usually kept quite well up to date, meant that your opponent had far more trouble predicting how you would attack, what form your attack might take. When you've got an air group which is largely composed of one aircraft, it's very efficient logistically and operationally from training for the scenarios and all those things and force generation. It is. Don't get me wrong, it is very efficient. But it also means that your enemy kind of has an idea what your style of attack is going to be, because you've kind of got one piece to play with. You might have lots of those pieces, but you only have one piece to play with. Whereas if you consider the 1990s, there could be a long-range strike carried out by prowlers, which could be almost as long-range as tomahawks, quite happily. And they could be carrying missiles which could add a range onto that strike. And you could be dealing with air defense a long way out, pretty much acting as its own air defense. And yes, again, these are capabilities we can rebuild. Please note, these are not capabilities we've been lost to time for us with technology. It's just in pursuit of efficiency. And I would say efficiency from a commercial standpoint, because it is efficient from a commercial standpoint, we have lost capability from a warfighting and even a deterrent standpoint. Because again, these aircraft were a great deterrent. A great deterrent capability, because they extended the range of the carrier strike group so much. And I was really hoping when we started talking about drones on carriers that the US Navy was going to go, right then, we're going to bring back the strike range. We're going to bring back the capability. And I saw some of the options put forward. And they look like, oh yes, that will bring back the capability that was lost to the Intruders. That will bring back something which can give the carriers a really long-range punch. Which will mean all those people who are sitting there claiming, oh, carriers can now be killed easily, are going to be sat there going, well, yes, of course they can claim killed easily. Over thousands of miles of ocean, we don't know where they're frigating striking from. And then I hear people go, well, they can still do that because you can get a tanker. And I go, well, the Intruders were the tanker aircraft. And now we've got buddy store systems, which that doesn't really help. Or we're relying on tankers from land bases, and that also doesn't really help in terms of giving the carriers really the reach they need. It's a methodology which works as long as you're not fighting a peer. And that's a problem. That is a problem. With that all being said, I suppose it's fair to move to the summary and the ultimate scenario that sees them lost. Now, the thing about the Intruder as a summary is that it's really a hard aircraft to sum up because it is just such a flexible platform. It is a really flexible platform. It's one of those systems which, when you look at the history of, you just get a constant buzz of, wow, they can do that? They can do that? It's beautiful. It is sensible. It is, in many ways, the bomb truck which makes the rest of the fleet work. You have the expensive top of the line air defense fighter. Cool. That also does reconnaissance. Cool. You then have this airframe which you can adapt into, well, to be honest, you can adapt into your electronic warfare aircraft. You then have the Viking for the ASW, and you have these sort of aircraft which are cheaper to operate, far cheaper in terms of cost of per flight hour, etc. to operate, but they provide you with the utility capabilities that make your carrier fleet work. And this is something which we've forgotten, I think, in terms of carrier operations. I think we've forgotten the value of the utility aircraft. And it's something I'm really hoping, and this is one of the reasons why in the previous key aircraft I did the Queen Bees, and I finished off talking about the new Sea Guardian drone. I'm really hoping that when we get drones back, we're going to see some of the utility aircraft capability return to the carrier air wing. Because the thing is, carriers haven't got less capable. Carriers have not got less capable in the last 40 years. They really haven't. Carriers have been a very capable platform for their entire history. Why? Because they are quite literally a floating airfield which can defend itself, supply itself, and sustain itself. I have that quote which I often use on this channel from, well, Admiral Caspar John, which basically goes through and lists all the things that are encapsulated in an aircraft carrier. And it's true that aircraft carriers are still those things. They are still a ship with a box on the top, with an AA battery, with a sector command, with all the intelligence capabilities, all the medical facilities, all the engineering facilities, all the depot and armaments facilities that you would expect to sustain this air group. But what carriers are dependent on is the aircraft you put on them. They're dependent upon the aircraft you build for them. They are as useful as the aircraft which fly from their decks. They are as utilitarian as the aircraft which fly from their decks. They are as flexible as the aircraft which fly from their decks. And as you cut the aircraft down, you cut your carriers down. You cut down their flexibility. You cut down their adaptability. And yes, the aircraft can be great, but any airframe is constrained by the forces of physics as we understand them. And also, to an extent, the squishy organic bits which tend to fly them. Whether they are flying them from inside the aircraft or from a station, on a carrier, on land, wherever. And all that needs to be remembered. And we need to bring back the flexibility. I know it's cheaper. I realise it is far more efficient to build one to rule them all, one ring to rule them all. One plane to rule them all. It's so efficient. It's so neat and orderly. But warfare isn't neat and orderly. You try and train the personnel, you try and make everything as neat and orderly as you can, because that is trying very much to have some control in a very savage, very tenuous circumstance and scenario. There is a phrase about war that is where you see humans at our best and at our worst, where you see the greatest heroism that humanity can achieve and the greatest barbarity it can descend to. But the reality is, war is chaos. Controlled chaos, but chaos. And the way you manage chaos is through flexibility and adaptability. You can roll with the chaos rather than being destroyed by the chaos. And for a carrier, that means aircraft types. Rather like when we're talking about ships and missile types for their VLS tubes. For a carrier, it's aircraft types. Yes, I know we talk about weapon systems, not platforms. You know, we want to be able to fire lots of different weapon systems from these aircraft. And that's great. Again, have them be flexible assets. But having a flexible asset which is strike orientated and a flexible asset which is air defense orientated would make sense. Because in one of those criteria, you want something which has a healthy dose of bomb truck in it. And one of those circumstances, you want something which has a healthy dose of assassin in it. That's the scenarios we're talking about. And the thing is, I'm not sure if everyone's read up their history or played their computer games in a scenario, but often assassins do not look like bomb trucks. They're often very different builds of human when they're doing these things. There are purposes you can use both body types for, but it's the same with aircraft. You need that adaptability. You need that flexibility. And it shouldn't be realistically that it's the rotary wing which is bringing the most flexibility to our aviation capabilities, even though they've been reduced even further. But quite a few services have multiple types of helicopters in their service, but only one type of jet fighter. It's a heady world. So that all being said, and realizing that this video, rather than being 25 minutes, is going to be far, far closer to 50. What I want you to think about the Intruder is realistically this. She is an aircraft which you have when you're preparing for conflict, when you're preparing for war. Getting rid of this type of utilitarian craft is something you do when you think you're smarter than war. You always want something like this on your books. You always do. It's similar to something like the F-16. It's cheap, it's cheerful, it does its job. Effectively, but it does its job. Are you expecting it to do the same things as you expect an F-22 or an F-15? No. But it does its job. Same with Intruder. It does its job. So, I want to finish with a question, and I have a question which I think would interest you all. You see, when you consider the Intruder and its development, and the Blackburn Buccaneer, both are developed at rather similar times, with rather similar needs. Slightly different, I will admit, slightly different, but there is a similarity going on there. And I'd like you to imagine a world where Blackburn and Blackburn and Grumman get together and decide to jointly develop their aircraft. So it's a joint Anglo-American project to produce, well, the buccaneering Intruder. Now, in that kind of world, I see the Buccaneer getting more development, and I see also the Intruder getting more development because it's a joint aircraft. But I'd also perhaps see a pathway for Britain to still be building CVO-1s, the carriers, to operate this joint aircraft. Be also interesting because almost likely, maybe not from the precise get-go, but if you consider by the time we get to the A6E, you have, well, even the original A6, you have the ability to carry sidewinders. There is the very real scenario that you also get similar increased capabilities on the British aircraft. Or rather, it's a joint aircraft, so what would a joint Intruder Buccaneer development look like? Would they still have the pilots side by side as they did in the pilot navigator side by side as they did in the Intruder, or would they have them one behind the other as they do in the Buccaneer? What engines would they go with? What changes do you think will happen with each aircraft? Because, again, the Buccaneer has an internal bomb bay, capable of carrying another 4,000 pounds of bombs, plus external hydroplates that can carry 12,000 pounds of bombs. So the Buccaneer could carry 16,000 pounds compared to the Intruder's 18,000 pounds. Imagine the scenario that could be worked on if you can build an aircraft jointly together. It'd be an interesting aircraft to think about and an interesting aircraft to see the operational capabilities of. It would be also interesting if a joint aircraft program started at that point, how that would affect modern construction and production of aircraft, and how the carrier arms might develop. It's always interested me the fact those two aircraft with such similar requirements in terms of being strike aircraft, bomb trucks, are developed simultaneously and yet are separate programs, rather than anyone going, why don't we see if we can develop something better between us, together? And I'd love to hear what you think would have happened. With that being said, thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I, for some reason, haven't underlined this, but I do know that when this video comes out, if I'm not mistaken, it is going to be, and I did put this on the front screen, the 22nd of August. And if this comes out on the 22nd of August, then by my count, it should be next week. Hugo von Paul, architect and proponent of World War I's unrestricted submarine warfare. An interesting officer indeed. A very interesting officer indeed. Also, by this point, you'll see now who's been selected for the 17th of August. That's because, honestly, the 17th of August, the 16th, and 23rd of September, I've been wanting to see suggestions from people. I hope I'll have them filled in by the time this goes live. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and take care. Bye. And if you like the videos, please do like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Thank you, and means a lot to me.